when it wasn't until in the last 50 or 60 years that people needed this type of driver's license. Now, I'll give it to you. There's a lot of people that maybe shouldn't have a driver's license. But the right to travel is in our Constitution. And the only thing that's happened in this, in having to get a driver's license, is people are now paying fines to the tune of an average of $3,000 to $4,000 per courthouse experience when they walk in and pay these fines. Now, I don't mean the $200 that they're paying in the fine. I mean the few $1,000s that the court bonds them for and makes on the backside. That's a whole other ballgame, ladies and gentlemen. Your very lives are bonded and traded with a QSIP number on Wall Street. This is the biggest statement. This next statement is going to hurt. You, if you're a 14th Amendment United States citizen, you are the bond servant slave, collateral, literal collateral, the corporation that is going out of business. What's going to happen to the collateral to this corporation when it actually goes out of business? Think about that very hard as we go on. What I'd like to do is talk about how we got reseated and what happened at that event. This is big. Ladies and gentlemen, this is probably the most important day that we've had in this century, or in 2 centuries. In the last 150 years, nobody's ever done what the Republic people have done in getting reseated and reforming this Republic for the United States of America. In the last year, thousands of people got together and they formed what's called jural, Jural, assemblies nationwide. These jural assemblies are the bodies of the Republic, meaning they're the people. They represent that Republic. I don't want to get into the specifics of how they get seated at this time, but what they do is they do get seated, and then they voted for their own representatives, a Congress, Senate, and a House of Representatives, a group of men and women that were willing to stand up and sign on the bottom line and say, I will represent the people. Those men and women I am super proud of, because in September, we got together with 500 people on a phone call, and using technology that wasn't available back in 1700s, we convened Congress. We didn't develop the operational documents, but we got them all together. We got about 480 people on a phone call at one time. We asked the people to vote, and it was 479 to 1. They all voted for Tim Turner as the President of the Republic for the United States, and they voted for the type of government that they would have, government where there was a legislative, judicial, and executive branch. That was all that had to be required for that particular night. The next thing, Utah, the Republic of Utah, decided to put an event together. Now, this is historic. I'm going to try to paint this picture as best as I can. In Utah, this document that people are inquiring about because nobody has seen it yet. I'm going to explain the history and the course of this document and how it's going to come about in this next couple of weeks. Because there's a lot of people that heard 200 people sign this document. Well, how did they get together? How did they sign? Utah decided to have an event. The Republic of Utah decided to have an event at a ranch in their republic. The people, about a week before, decided, why don't we see if we can get enough people, enough of these senators and representatives to hold a joint session of Congress in this Republic of Utah so that they can convene and sit down and make their set of operating documents so that the foundational piece of the government would be seated. So they did. We got together on a Thursday, and it wasn't until about Saturday at noon when we realized, and this is important, that those people with their what's called, I forget what they call they had permission from the other people to come and vote on their behalf. It's called the proxy, I just remembered. That proxy and those 200 people, they came together in a room where nobody on the executive was allowed in, except the president of the Senate at the time, which is the vice president of the United States, Charles Wright. I'm not sure if Tim came in or not, he really didn't want to go in there. He didn't want to seem as if he was leading him down any road whatsoever. They got together in a cold building with one outhouse. Now, please imagine that for a second. They're in Utah. Snow is outside. They're in a building with no heat, and they have one outhouse. Now, these dedicated people were sitting down. They first developed and got into a group of committees to go over and start working on the operating documents. So they put forth, got all their committees together, and they started working on the operating documents. Now, I don't want to tell you anymore what happened in that room because I'm not privileged to, but I've heard a lot of stories. But I'm not going to let my own opinion of what happened. I heard it was momentous. I heard there was a lot of cries. I heard there was a lot of joy. I heard many, many things. The bottom line is this. It was a Sunday, and it was midnight or pretty close to it, where a notice came out to everybody else in the world that they came to an agreement on the operating document. And I remember getting a phone call from Justice Billy Faust in Arizona, and Billy said, "Kelby, you better wake up. We got a party. We did it." I said, "Billy, I'm going back to bed. Love you, buddy." And I was tired. Congratulations. What else am I going to say? That was unbelievable. You got to realize, ladies and gentlemen, we had been working for a few days already to get this moment to happen. We were tired. President hadn't slept. I don't think in 2 days, but maybe a few hours. At 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm just going to say it this way. The document was delivered by an armed security team to the ranch. Okay? Now, this document is called the Declaration of Sovereign Intent. This document came with 200 plus signatures of the legislative body, the Congress and the representatives. Those signatures could not all fit on the document, so they had to go on some blank pages on the back of the document. Well, an armed security team came to the ranch at 3 o'clock in the morning with all the computers, all the printers, and they knocked on the president's door, of which there was a group of about 8 or 9 people already in the room with the president. And we were all sleeping. And they woke us up. And boy, was it a moment, because we were all looking at each other, realizing history just had been made. The next thing you know, I'm handed what's called a chain of custody agreement. I was the final receiving me, Kelby, little old Kelby. I received those printers, those computers, into my custody because I was the only representing IT force for the Republic at the time, at that moment. And I got to sign on this chain of custody agreement and go through the documents and go through the computer. I then handed it to my president, Mr. James Timothy Turner. I said, all the documents are in order, and I turned the documents over to him. Well, he then signed on it, and we're all looking at each other, and we're dumbfounded. He gave an order to us at that moment. He said, you protect this document with your very lives. He also said some other things that I won't share on this call tonight, but it was pretty intense. We protected that document with our lives. Here's the point. The document went from 200 people who executed it. They knew what they were reading. They knew what they were signing. They executed it. It went with about 10 to 12 armed security to the camp. They then signed it over through a chain of custody to the IT and then to the president. And then it went into a briefcase, and we were all told, this group of about 8 or 9 guys, to protect that document with our very lives. That was how intense this moment was. Well, needless to say, I didn't go back to sleep that night, I don't think. And when we woke up, the next day we got to go down to the main lodge of the camp. Now, you got to imagine being with this document, not executed yet. It has to be executed by the President, the Chief Justice, the Speaker of the House, and the Senate Pro Tem. And we have to protect it with our lives to make sure this takes place. It gets back to the ranch. There's about 100 people. We decide to have a meeting and a signature party. This document is put before the world to take pictures of, and I'm not kidding, this was a photo opportunity. Pictures were snapping all over the place. People were excited. People were crying. People were singing praise to our God, praise songs, literally at the signing of the Declaration of Sovereign Intent. This document is what is going to change this country forever. Many people that day were touched. Many people were looking at me, just shaking their heads. We didn't know what to think. We were all giddy. Then the president lays the document on the table. He looks down, he looks up for the photo op, and he looks down and he signs. And all the senior staff signed this document. This document then goes back into a folder, and we go back into protect mode. Now, that day, the only time that document came out of the case was when we bought a color scanner. We took the computer that was going to scan the document offline, we put a firewall on it, shut down all the portholes, and we put the document on from the scanner straight to a zip drive. We then copied that document to about 3 or 4 zip drives, one of those tiny little gigabyte drives. We handed it to some very important people in our republic to keep as a backup, and we took 2 originals or 3 original copies as backups. That document went through the proper chain of custody. That document followed the procedures and the guidelines of what it will be to protect a document of that magnitude. That document is what's going to change this republic forever. Now, I want you all on this phone call to know nothing else but what I just said happened other than a bunch of inter-stories that I wasn't able to tell you. Now, guys, we are the Republic for the United States of America. That is done. You're not going to take that back. And what I mean by that is going to roll into another story right now. The reason why I'm building this up to a bunch of stories and a bunch of things is because this is what the people need to hear in order to understand who they are. 2 days ago, I was at coffee with 2 cop friends of mine that live in my neighborhood. And boy, did I let them have it. It was the first time that I actually had something on me that looked like we were a legitimate republic. I had my republic identification that I could get from the Bureau of Republic Records. I had 3 IDs on me, and boy, did they look really, really, really good. And when you understand what these identifications are, and I'm going to talk about them a little bit in just a minute, but I was able to show it to them. And they started talking about what they were going to be willing to do and not do if they were to pull me over. And we started giggling back and forth and going at it. And I dropped the bomb on them, and I told them what I just told you guys about the 1800s and how those seats were vacated in 1860. And I told them that basically we were, as a government, disbanded, and that this de facto government was the only lawful or legal, government on the land. Now, he and I went back and forth, and it came to this one point. This is what I really want to share with you guys, because these identifications give you the right to travel freely, lawfully, because they're real. They're not a piece of plastic with your picture on it. They're registered, and they're so registered that we are going to notify the world of them. We're going to notify the world, meaning every agency in this country, county, city, state, on sea, and on land. Thousands of notices are going out. They will be advised, because that's a part of it. You can't just re-inhabit. You have to notice people. So what are we doing to notice them? We're noticing them at The Hague, at the United Nations, all over this country. But when I was talking to these police officers and we were going back and forth, I said, let me ask you a simple question. Can you drive onto the land of an Indian, meaning their reservation, and can you pull them over and give them a ticket and go, no, that's sovereign land, that's their land? And I looked at him and I basically thought in my mind, checkmate. I said, well, let me explain what happened in November. That document, the Declaration of Sovereign Intent, it gives the metes and bounds. That is the description of our borders, metes and bounds, description of our borders, north, south, east, west, Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean to the Canadian border to the Mexican border. We retook the land. We retook claim to the land because we walked away from it in the 1860s.